Greetings and felicitations, children of technology. If all goes as planned, then this video should be out just in time for the first anniversary of Elden Ring. To celebrate the game being 1 year old, I've decided to take on another challenge. So, Elden Ring has 165 bosses in total, and quite a bit more than 165 weapons. So, can I beat every single boss in Elden Ring with a different weapon? Huh? Wait, what do you mean Dist already did the same run? And he did it while region locked? Damn. Well, I'm just gonna do it anyway, it seems too fun to pass up. Besides, I've had this idea since October, and I'm not gonna give up just because someone else did it first. So for the purpose of this run, any item in my hand that occupies a weapon spot is considered a weapon. This means if I have a shield in my left hand for parrying, then that shield can only be used on one boss, as well as what other weapon is in my right hand. Spells are not allowed, and consumables that do damage, like fire pots and kukris, are discouraged, but not exactly prohibited. I was gonna make Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I couldn't really be bothered, so instead we have Glurt. Anyway, first we get turned into Swiss cheese by the grafted scion, who for once will eventually take revenge on, and then throw ourselves face first into the Cave of Knowledge and punch Rick in the kidneys until he dies. Side note, I'm free to use my bare fists whenever I want, because they are the absence of a weapon, not a weapon. Next, we rush the Church of Ella and run around grabbing as many weapons as we can. Beastman of Fur Missoula gets whacked to death with a torch, much the same with the Wounded Black Knife Assassin, just with a heater shield instead of a torch. Then we kill the Tibia Mariner with a short sword, and then, after a quick detour to Dragon Barrow to grab some things and kill not a boss, we pay Patches a visit and borrow his spear. I promise I'll give it back. Then use it to kill a Geel. Heading down to Weeping Peninsula, I go full Indiana Jones on some really ugly guy, then go full Scumnut on another really ugly guy, then do a little deforestation with the steel wire torch, club a cemetery shade, yeah, you get the idea, bosses, more bosses, Deathbird, Watchcat, yeah, let's move on to something silly. So I do something in this run that I like to call funny fights. Suffering for the sake of comedy by doing ridiculous bosses with stupid weapons because I think it would be kind of funny. Case in point, Crucible Knight versus +0 parrying dagger. Trading blows here is just simply not an option, but it was easier than I thought because of the obvious tells on all of the Crucible Knight's attacks, making him very consistent for parrying. So now back to regular bosses like Tree Sentinel, Troll, Deathbird, and most amusingly, a bell-bearing hunter who I bullied to a square off until our fight ended in a draw. Then an ungodly amount of farming for weapons that I don't really need, before finally moving on to a real boss. Margit versus the Warpick. Yeah, I kinda hate this weapon, but that's also kinda why we're using it on Margit and not someone stronger. My Margit fight wasn't exactly clean, but it shows how much better I've gotten at this game. I mean, I used to really suck at this game. And I still do, but just not as much. Speaking of fights that are not at all clean, Knight's Cavalry versus Misbegotten Shortbow, because I love to suffer. Case in point, another funny fight, and quite possibly the worst one ever. Yeah, get ready for the hardest boss in the game. The Grave Warden Duelist. Yeah, I'm not really sure what possessed me to bonk this guy with a Demi-Human Queen staff, or why I didn't just give up and try a real weapon when I saw that I was doing a maximum of 10 damage per hit. But hey, at least the time lapse is funny. Then we have another shield kill. I promise I won't do too many more of these. Besides, there aren't that many bosses left in Limgrave. Just Daryl, who I impaled on a pike, the Demi-Human Chiefs, which my scimitar dealt with pretty easily, and also I lied. Time for more shield kills. Including Godric, because really, he's such a pushover, I probably could have beaten him with a wooden spoon. Also, I needed the Wish.com sock puppet version of his dragon arm to beat the weird worm in Rick's basement. And that was Limgrave. Let's go on a little vacation to Liurnia, shall we, and do what one does when they're on a vacation. Stab one of the locals. Then on to the easiest boss in Liurnia so we can beat him to death with a wooden great shield. That way we can actually upgrade weapons reliably. Or we could just not. I mean, I've done perfectly fine so far not upgrading weapons, unless you count the staff, which was at +7. After talking to Raya, then Boggart, then Raya again, we kill Smarag with the long-haft axe on the way to Ruinstrewn Precipice, home of Makar, who happens to be quite susceptible to fisting. Now we have access to Altus, and specifically the region's easiest boss, Gillica, who happens to be quite susceptible to being knifed in the Black Knife Catacombs has two bosses, one of them being a cemetery shade with his very annoying gang of skeletons.
Anyway, I started blasting. Bah, bah. Well, I don't see so good, so I missed.
The other boss is, what do you know, a Black Knife assassin. I'm pretty sure I've been the target of more assassination attempts than Fidel Castro at this point. Anyway, my favorite part of Elden Ring has honestly got to be the part where the Royal Revenant goes, "It's Revenanting time," and then Revenants all over. Definitely one of the fights in Elden Ring. Why did I put that in the script? But he drops the Frozen Needle, which is a pretty cool little weapon, no pun intended. I used it to kill Aiden, then headed back to Limgrave and took a really long elevator down the Shifa River. Really brings me back to my Undertale speedrunning days. Now that we're in Shifra, you know what that means. More groin slashing. I don't have anything clever to say for the next few bosses. You know, I mean, Knight's Cavalry versus Stormhawk Talon, and Animal Cruelty with a Showdle. Look, we're on our second Remembrance boss already. Renala, who, like most single mothers, can't handle being pierced with large objects. No, but seriously, Renala gets destroyed by Great Spears. So does pretty much every dragon, but for the one on the bridge in Dragon Barrow, Edgar's halberd did a pretty nice job too. I don't know why, but I really love killing this guy early on. It's just a fun challenge. Anyway, I also love funny fights. So, From really tried to make all weapons viable in this game, but the torch pole is just objectively one of the worst weapons in the game. It's non-somber, but you can't put Ashes of War on it, you can't put weapon buffs on it, and the fire damage doesn't scale with anything. So who would win? A plague-breathing dragon, or a fire on the end of a stick? Why do I do these things? So after using the worst weapon in the game, we go to grab the best weapon in the game, Death's Poker. Well, second best. I probably could have used this on any boss, but I'm most comfortable with Radahn because I've actually done hitless Radahn with this weapon before. Granted, that was when I had my character built around the weapon and was doing way more damage, and I was also at +9 or whatever. So this time I was nowhere near hitless, but it was pretty damn easy. That Mad Pumpkinhead duo was also pretty easy with the hook claws, and so was the Putrid Avatar with a Beast Repellent Torch. Not so easy is the second worst duo fight in the game, who I eventually beat with a really tiny shield and a really big dagger. After that fight, I get a breath of fresh air from a Spirit Collar Snail, only to subject myself to a grueling shield fight with another avatar. Because, hey, I haven't seen this shield before. Although, the next two fights are a lot easier and actually fun. Then, to kill two birds with one stone, I kill two birds with two stones and the Knight's Cavalry with the worst straight sword in the game, because he deserves no better. Speaking of deserving no better, Mimic Tier. Yeah, I probably could have beaten the Mimic Tier with anything, but maybe a staff wasn't the best idea. I mean, it was a lot easier than the Grave Warden Duelist, but it was also a lot more painful, because I was listening to Earth by Little Dicky on loop for the entire 32-minute fight. Because funny. Then I beat Balls and won a totally fair 9v1, followed by Fake Loretta and the easiest duo boss in the game. Nearby, in everyone's favorite cave, I use a big knife to kill a big bug. I'm really all over the place in this run, down in Shifra again, all the way back in the Chapel of Anticipation, and then down in Nokron again to take out the lamest Remembrance boss. Then it's time for the Crystallian duo, and really it was only a matter of time before I used the Jellyfish shield. And the Grafted Scion shield too. I've used way too many shields in this video. I also forgot to use my halberd that I've had since the beginning of the game, so here you go, Bloodhound Knight. Happy birthday. Then there's another Knight's Cavalry who I beat with the Flameburger or whatever it's called. Well, really, the giant crow beat both of us, but I'm not keeping score. Next up is the Magma Worm that drops Moonveil, who was actually one of the first bosses I ever fought in this game. He's pretty weak to strike, and it's not hard to bleed him, so I used a Morningstar. Heading up to Altus, we have our very last Tibia Mariner of the run, who I beat with the Highland Axe but forgot to record. Followed by the Tree Sentinel duo versus the game's middest weapon art stick. To break up the boring monotony with some fun monotony, I decided to fight the second strongest Bell-bearing hunter with Roger's Rapier, then waste one of the best weapons in the game on Onyx Lord, because I'm not very smart. But I'm smarter than the Valiant Gargoyle duo, my favorite boss in Elden Ring. I've been trying on and off to do this fight ever since I got access to Nokron. Giving up after a few attempts, coming back, giving up again, and so on and so forth. So I'm glad I finally beat them. Do you guys remember Godfroy? Yeah, me neither. Remember Necromancer Garrus? Yeah, me neither. You know, I'm really running out of things to say besides shimmy. Anyway, take a wild guess. as to which weapon I used against Rykard. Just guess. To get us closer to finishing Caelid, I thought it would be funny to kill the frenzied duelist with a crossbow, and to my credit, it wasn't. Then we have rare footage of me actually fighting a Godskin boss without putting them to sleep, and entertaining footage of me beating DTS by only parrying his fireballs. Bonus points for doing like no damage in retaliation. Whatever, this gives us access to Lanedale, but I won't be going there for a little while. I have other business with the strongest bell-bearing hunter. Then there's also that dumb Blackblade Kindred who I beat to death with the ballsack hammer. In a nearby cave, we have the two Farum Beastmen, who are pretty tricky due to their advanced homing technology on their throwing knives, but a scythe did the trick. Also, the Silly Face shield more than did the trick on the Rotten Avatar in Dragonburrow, and the Cypherpoda were a pretty good choice against the only guy in the entire fucking world who's weak to holy damage. Speaking of weaknesses, Crucible Knights seem to be weak to small shields, so Ordovis and his buddy were a good pick for a cool headsman concept build with the Executioner Great Axe and Pillory Shield. I just kinda came up with that one on the fly. I think it pairs quite well. Deathbirds are also very weak to holy damage, so I took one down with the Sentry Torch, a decision that I would later come to regret. But for now, I'm more concerned with that Clean Rot Knight duo, who weren't actually a concern at all because a spicy Wakizashi was more than enough to get both of them down, even though I was slowly dying the whole time. The Falling Star Beast near the capital outskirts was a bit trickier, but I had a gravity weapon, so it turned out fine. Mr. Wormface is another easy boss, since the only real concern with him is the very avoidable Deathblight. Honestly, most of the minor bosses in Altus are really easy, but maybe I'm just overleveled. Or perhaps I'm just too good. Likely some combination of the first two. Also, remember in my last challenge run when I said that the Dragon Great Claw was good? Yeah, I lied. It sucks. And so do I. Now where was I? Oh yeah, breaking into the Sainted Hero's grave and rolling over the Zamor guy. Then we have an invisible black knife, for whom I really wish I had a special weapon that made me able to see her. Anyway, who here likes poison? Alright, so back in Caelid we have the strongest tree spirit, the Watchcat duo, and the 3 1v1 Crystallians, as well as another cemetery shade. Also, rare footage of me killing the Knights Cavalry in Dragonburrow with something other than gravity, and common footage of me using Magma Worm's Scale Sword. Then we have more crotch fighting, yay! Then another round of Falling Star Beast versus Gravity Weapon. This next fight kinda just speaks for itself. That amazing fight also gave us the Inquisitor's Girandol, which is perfect for the Kindred of Rot. And then we fight the... Oops. After the next couple copy-paste, rinse and repeat field and dungeon bosses, we actually decide to beat Lansax this time, along with Briarboy. Now, finally entering Lanedale, we have Minimogue versus the Ruins Greatsword, followed by the Piss Ghost versus yet another shield. Of course. Then we have a real boss for once, Morgott. For him, I use Reduvia, which made this fight a total joke, honestly. I mean, it did way better than I thought it would, and I went in with high expectations. While I'm still here, I go after the Fell Twins with Dung Eater's sword, and then do a bit of Ronnie's questline so I can get access to Noxtella and the Lake of Rot, defeating their respective Dragonkin soldiers. From there, I use the Commander's Standard against Astel, marry Ronnie, and beat the two bosses in Moonlight Altar. Another area with two bosses is the Forbidden Lands, the transitory space between Altus Plateau and the mountaintops of the Giants. After clearing said area, it's Mogan time. For as weak as he is to bleed, I feel like this weapon is actually better against Moog than 95% of bleed weapons. I'm also just getting really tired of these guys who spam bleed but are really weak to it themselves. Anyway, we've finally finished with all the areas before the mountaintops, you know, except for the deep root depths, but we'll get back to that. So really, we're almost done. Just gotta, unleash the souls of the damned onto a tree spirit. Yeah. And then go obtain one of the most fun weapons in the game, the Death Ritual Spear. With this thing, I can use a cool magic trick to turn one spear into 1,000 spears. Then I went after the old Vike, you know, before he went Joker mode. Then there's also the poor man's Godskin duo in Spirit Caller Cave, but you know, I'm somewhat of a Spirit Caller myself. Then the self-replicating Erdtree avatar, who I beat with the Godslayer Greatsword, which I forgot to record because, again, I'm not very smart. Whatever. Next we have a pretty amusing fight against Commander Nile with what I like to call the grenade launcher shield. I would definitely use this weapon art in something like a shield only or fire damage only run if I ever did one. It's really fun. Stray Mimic Tier is also pretty fun, because again, I could beat it with just about anything if I wanted to, but when I got a second Vulgar Militia Saw in the Hidden Path to the Haligtree, I knew what I had to do. And then guess what? Another Zaymor hero with another lightning-infused weapon. But after all that, it's Fire Giant time. You know, I feel like that's how you know we're in real late game, when we're fighting Fire Giant. And what better weapon for Fire Giant than a baby rattle? A lot. Yeah, there are a lot of better weapons, but Nebula is cool, so I'm using it. The damage is pretty solid, especially with the Warrior Jar Shard, although in terms of magic weapon arts, it's nowhere near as good as something like Carrion Grandeur. More on that later. Anyway. Then we bully Fia's tier 3 Twitch subs with Hoslow's Pedal Whip, and then repeatedly poke Lich Dragon Fortnite Sex with a rusty nail so we can sit back and watch as he dies of tetanus. After all that, we pay a quick visit to the Misbegotten Warrior's devout Christian cousin and ice him. Then kill Magma Worm Theodore with, again, a strike and bleed weapon. Unfortunately, Yellow Onyx Tunnel has another Astel, for some reason. And this one is even harder than the Remembrance boss version, for some reason. Yeah, I actually needed to resort to Morgoth's Great Rune in order to avoid leveling my weapon of choice, the Golden Halberd, past +6. Or I could have just gotten good, but you know, that would have taken too long. But you know who else needs to get good? Consecrated Snowfield's Putrid Avatar, who's really weak to fire, of course. I mean, it's a tree. Rather weak to fire is also the Rotten Duelist, who's weak to bleed as well. So I made quick work of him with Eleonora's Poleblade. I hope you remember the Misbegotten Crusader, because we're using his Holy Sword on this Deathrite bird. The Holy Sword he totally didn't steal from Radagon. Lastly, I used my favorite spear in the game to put an end to the Knights Cavalry duo, marking the defeat of the last boss in the Consecrated Snowfield. Now on to Crumbling Farm Missoula, I guess. Now, unfortunately, Godskin Duo is a boss in Elden Ring. But fortunately, the aforementioned Carrion Grandeur is a weapon art in Elden Ring. I mean, what can I say? It's pretty good. You know what else is pretty good? The Misericord. I mean, I'm not saying it's the best weapon in the game or anything, no, not by far, but slap Glintblade Phalanx on it and you can easily bully Malakath. Now, speaking of bullying, we're fighting Gideon with Vike's Warspear. Now, the first attempt on Gideon could have been really easy, but I fucked it up. I got him on my third attempt though, but even that victory wasn't exactly perfect. I mean, I still made two big mistakes. One was letting him drink, and the other was this. But it turned out more than alright in the end. Now a quick detour to one of the biggest, and also the worst legacy dungeon in the game, Miquella's Haligtree. Using the Commander's Foot as fists, we kill the real Loretta and her horse, before moving on to the Rot Lady herself. Now, to say that I've been dreading Melania is an understatement. But hey, I was also dreading Godskin Duo, and that fight turned out easy enough, so maybe the Blade of Miquella won't be so bad after all. Especially because I decided to respec into the single most powerful weapon in the game, the Marais Executioner Sword. Yeah, so the last time I fought Melania was actually in the last challenge run that I did, so it took me a little while to get used to the rhythm and get the hang of her moveset again, but once I did, this fight was kind of a joke. I mean, this weapon stun locks her so hard that on my successful attempt, she didn't even get to do Waterfowl Dance a single time. Now, of course, she can't really be stun locked in the second phase because she can just say nope and use her infinite hyper armor kick to kick her way out of a stagger, which is kind of bullshit, and this refusal to stagger is what killed me in the majority of my unsuccessful attempts. But even then, the kicks were not a problem in that final successful attempt, an attempt where I wasn't even using Morgoth's Great Rune, by the way, and didn't need to because I only got hit a total of 5 times, 4 of which were just her little sword swings. Also, a quick but unhinged rant, why do so many people want to fuck Melania? Like, I get that she's hot, I guess, but you gotta think about other senses besides sight, okay? Like, I know it's a video game, and so you can't smell her, but just imagine for a moment how horrible she would smell. Like, good god. The same goes for Radon or Millicent or anyone else with Scarlet Rot. Like, there's no way in hell that anyone afflicted with Scarlet Rot doesn't smell like a corpse. But whatever, I'm just glad we only have 2 more bosses left to go. Next up is Godfrey, the first Elden Chad, also known as Hoaraloo, Warrior. Now, for this fight, I thought it would be cool and kind of funny to box Hoaraloo with the Iron Ball's spiked cousins and 4th best weapon in the game, the Star Fists. Now, fun fact about these Star Fists is that out of the 163 some odd weapons I've used in this run so far, these balls are only the 2nd weapon that I've actually fully upgraded to a regular plus 25 or Somber plus 10. The first, of course, being the Morais Executioner Sword, because, you know, I'm not going to use a less than plus 10 weapon against Melania. But I fought Moog with a plus 8 Somber weapon, Fire Giant and Godskin Duo with plus 9 Somber weapons, Malekith with a plus 22, and Gideon with a plus 7 Somber. But no matter, I'm almost Elden Lord. All I have to do now is beat Radagon and Elden Beast, and... oh shit, I forgot about the Dragon Lord. Dragon Lord Flaccid Dude Sex is a boss in Elden Ring. And yeah, that's about it. In my last challenge run, I had mistakenly used Dragon Wound Grease on this guy, not realizing that the grease doesn't work on him, as for some reason he is classified as neither a dragon enemy nor an ancient dragon enemy. But this time I didn't make that mistake and opted to use Godfrey's Axe instead, because it does some pretty chunky damage and has a kinda cool weapon art that I actually didn't end up using in this fight at all. Anyway, this boss is kinda dumb, time for the final boss. Now, I have a bit of a surplus of unused weapons, and because of that, I decided to use 2 different weapons in this fight, one for each phase. So, for Radagon, I decided to use Rivers of Blood. Yeah. Okay, hear me out. My thought process behind this weapon choice is that since Radagon is immune to bleed, the massive nerf to the bleed buildup on this weapon just doesn't affect Radagon at all, obviously. But since he's really weak to fire, then the weapon art still can make quick work of him, as the fire damage was only very slightly nerfed in comparison to the bleed buildup. So I had to respec to really get the full effect of this weapon, but it was worth it because it completely shredded Radagon. Plus, I don't really need any decent stats other than Vigor for the Elden Beast, because I decided to use the Godskin Peeler for its weapon art, Black Flame Tornado, which the majority of the damage for that weapon art is percentage based. Yeah, I know, I'm using the same weapon art that I used on Elden Beast in my last run, but honestly, I don't really care. I mean, sure, it's unoriginal, but it's fun. And that's really all that matters. Ew, I'm all covered in Elden juice. Alright everybody, that was every single boss in Elden Ring with a different weapon, all 165 of them. Not the hardest run ever, or the most original, but it was fun, and I'm glad I did it. If you're watching this on the 25th, then happy Elden Ring Day, I guess. If you're not, I don't really have much else to say, although I suppose I do have one very special announcement to make.